My name is Jean White, and I've lived in Woodstock my whole life, with the exception of schooling and then some years away for working. But other than that, I've had an attachment here. My family came in 1825, as far as I can follow. Before that, there was a gentleman named Martin Booth, who would have been my great-great-great-grandfather, who came and lived on the plains, which is up behind Overlook Mountain in the across the Sawkill on the other side. And he was an itinerant minister, along with his other work, which I guess was maybe just having a family and a farm. And so his daughter married James McDaniel, and that was the McDaniel family, is where kind of I start. They settled on Overlook Mountain behind Mead's Mountain House, down from where the monastery is now, on the McDaniel Road, it's now called. My grandmother had a boarding house in Woodstock on Tinker Street, or Mill Hill Road, in 1922. Before that, she did a few other things here. She had a restaurant up near where House is. She had some 5 daughters and thought that they could operate the telephone company house to operate the switchboard, and after that, I think that's when she came into the homestead business after that. My uncle had the first garage in Woodstock, and it was located where the mobile station is now, right opposite Deming Street, and that was the same site. My mother had a beauty parlor, and it was directly behind Joshua's in the building there, and it was called the Little Bo Peep Beauty Shop. And my aunt and uncle had the Nook, which is where Cafe Espresso was in the guess 60s and 70s, and now the Center for Photography is located there. And I had another uncle, Everett, who had a dairy. It was located up in Wittenberg, but I have a little glass bottle, half pint or pint milk bottle, that says Risley and Cash Dollar, the Locust Grove Dairy. So that's what his business was. Albert later became supervisor of the town, and then county treasurer. And then I think he was also a highway superintendent at one point. And I think that's the businesses that they had. My Aunt Louise was enterprising, and after the Nook, had a thrift shop during the war in the building that was just Allen's, up there next to the where the Landau is. And my uncle also, in addition to his painting, this was Clarence Bolton, and did lithographs, but he also tended the Western Union building, which was, at that time in the 40s, in the building, there's a window now at House, and there's a building, that was where the Western Union building was. At the thrift shop, during the war, Louise had consignment things, and people couldn't get certain materials or certain items in the supermarkets, or I should say in the hardware stores and things like that. So they would sort of recycle things, colanders, things made of metal and pots and so on. And so that did a thriving business during the wartime. And then after that, she got into antiques. And I think that they had a few of them up there in that location. And eventually got into the Red Barn, and that was where they were, she and a partner, Winifred Hiley, had a thriving antique business. And for about 20 years, maybe more, they had a yearly antique show. And every August, the first weekend in August, for 4 days. And that was a very colorful event. And the story is that they really didn't know what to expect the first year. But they had, I think, dealers from Connecticut and all over. And they said that the state police had to come and take care of traffic because there was so much going on. And of course, Woodstock at that time had just a constable, and he couldn't handle that. So that was... I lived in a house that is no longer there, right next to where the present CVS store is, between the CVS store and the Ulster Savings Bank. And it was a two-story house with a garage and a little outdoor privy attached. I grew up in a house right on Mill Hill Road that it was opposite the homestead, which was my grandmother's boarding house. And my house was located between the Woodstock School property and what's now the Ulster Savings Bank. I went to school right over the fence of the Woodstock School. The first few years, first, second, and kindergarten, were up by the, I say Old Deanie's, but it's the building that now is on the corner of Deming Street and Mill Hill Road. It has the Fletcher Gallery and the Indian restaurant in it. Right next to that is a red building. One on the far right was the kindergarten, and in the main part of the building we had first and second grade. And then we came down to the building that is behind CVS. There are two buildings. The smaller one was third and fourth grade, and the larger one was 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. In those days we went to high school in Kingston, and we didn't have school buses. We went on the black and white Pine Hill Kingston buses. It was lots of fun growing up here. I think mostly for me because I was right here in the village, and my grandmother's house was the second home. There was so much activity going on there. The activities at the school were few at that time, but we had Girl Scouts, and we had basketball, and I was on the girls' basketball team and didn't like it because you had to play girls' rules at that time. So, but it was wonderful. We had the library fair then, and we had market fairs on Saturday, and the grocery stores were where Not Fade Away is now, and where Oriole 9 is. There were two grocery stores, and the one where Not Fade Away is located was closer to me, so that's where I would go to pick up things sent for bread, which was about 13 cents a loaf, and so on. When my mother had the beauty parlor, it was in the days before electricity, and she would do the artist's hair. The women artists would come in and have their hair cut and washed and set and then wrapped in a bandana, and then they would go out and paint during the day, and at the end of the day they would come back, and then she would comb the hair out. It would be dry by then, and fashion it as they did. But one time she was asked to give a hot oil treatment, and everything had to be done by heating the water on the stove, and I imagine it was wood stove. And so she did that, but then the cleaning up was the hard part, because to get that oil out of the person's hair without scalding them, and then washing up towels and everything was something she hadn't bargained for. So I think that was kind of a humorous story there.
Did you meet a lot of artists when you were growing up?
I knew several, but only as a kid. I didn't really know how well known they were, or what the reputations were when I was young. I got interested in art, I think through my uncle, and then seeing so many people out painting in the fields and so forth. So by the time I went to high school, that was my path, and I had there was a wonderful art department there, a fabulous art teacher who was really a mentor to me and one of the most significant people in my life. So I guess it was about high school, I could say, I really got interested.
You left Woodstock and then returned. What brought you back?
Well, I really didn't ever leave it. My mother was here. She had the house here. I came summers and weekends. But I think I wanted to go out and just travel and see what was out there. But after that, and after working away from Woodstock, even teaching in New Jersey and coming up here, I felt this was the place that I wanted to be. And my husband wanted to be in a close range of New York City, was always interested in theater. And I said, you might like Woodstock, you know. So that's how this came about.
How had town changed from the time you left and when you came back?
Well, there were several physical changes, although not, to me, that's not terribly important because the buildings that were homes in my day are now businesses. They have changed a little bit, but you can still see that this was a thriving residential community at one point. And I think it's just things have gotten bigger. The ideas, I think, have been here since that time, the open-mindedness, the kind of sense of wonder, and those things combined with the old hometown honesty and integrity that the old-timers exhibited have made a marvelous community. I volunteered first for the sewer committee when we were trying to find a solution to this sewer debt, and that's when we moved back here. And met Jeremy, who was active, and I think that's the first thing. And then after that, there was a resolution to how we were going to pay for the sewers, and it wasn't equitable, but it was less hard on everybody, I think, than could have been. So that was the first thing, and then I was on the Comprehensive Plan Committee. I think it was one of 8 or 9 people to come up with a comprehensive plan, and that would have been about the late 90s. And after that, the CMO committee that was involved with deciding what direction the town would take with the CMO property. And that was one that I enjoyed. I met wonderful people on all of these committees, and my life has been enriched by that, you know, all of the interaction. I think the biggest changes have come with the number of people visiting, and perhaps the length of time that they are staying is sometimes seems to be shorter. It seemed to me when I was younger that people came for the summer, and families would come for the summer, and houses were rented for the summer, and so that you felt more. I think that they were more a part of the community. Now it seems like our visitors are not really a part of the community. I think that's one thing that strikes me. When I was little, there was we had Halloween. We didn't have a parade like they have today. And the building that is bred alone was an art gallery, the Rudolph Art Galleries. And the lady's name there was Peter. And it was Halloween. I was about 10, maybe 9, and I went up there and soaped windows. And when I came back through town, I was up by where Candlestock is now looking, and she was standing outside with a pail and a big sponge and waiting. And I lit out through that parking lot, the corner parking lot of house, and down what's now Deanie's Alley, where there were no lights on it or anything. And being Halloween, somebody had pulled some benches out into that alleyway. There was a stable there. I think it was like open for what I think at the time, in the old days, was for horses and carriages to be parked in. But anyway, somebody had just pulled out these old benches, and I tripped over them and skinned my knees. And when I got home, I dashed upstairs, didn't want to tell anybody what had happened, and remedied that. But I was very embarrassed about that. I love Woodstock. It's different from when I was growing up. The feeling is still here. The little bit of abrasiveness and contention maybe between groups and organizations, and but this is what I think makes the town. It's, if you can kind of get beyond that, it's like a lapidary that the stones that are in toss around and toss around, the rough edges get worn off and they become smooth. And that's how I kind of feel that we are progressing in this town, and I love it. The only thing I would change is if there's any a lack of a civil attitude towards one another. That's what I would change. But the desire to have things good for everybody is what I think motivates most of the people there. In the old days was for horses and carriages to be parked in. But anyway, somebody had just pulled out these old benches, and I tripped over them and skinned my knees. And when I got home, I dashed upstairs, didn't want to tell anybody what had happened, and remedied that. But I was very embarrassed about that.
Is there one thing you could change about Woodstock? What would it be?
I love Woodstock. It's different from when I was growing up. The feeling is still here. The little bit of abrasiveness and contention maybe between groups and organizations, and but this is what I think makes the town. It's, if you can kind of get beyond that, it's like a lapidary that the stones that are in toss around and toss around, the rough edges get worn off and they become smooth. And that's how I kind of feel that we are progressing in this town, and I love it. The only thing I would change is if there's any a lack of a civil attitude towards one another. That's what I would change. But the desire to have things good for everybody is what I think motivates most of the people there. I think my family, and I'm very grateful for this, has been open, and I saw little prejudice of any kind. And they were most welcoming to people who were coming from the city. That was how they made their living. My grandmother's boarding house, and really all of the other businesses thrived on the summer visitors, weekend visitors. So I think they had a really good attitude. I wasn't living here steadily in the 60s, so I don't know what that brought, but artists had always come here. Musicians had always come here. People were writing and creating, and I think that's what gives this town its full dimension, its life. So I don't have any feeling about not wanting people here. I do think that we enjoyed a little more of being able to walk freely in town. on the sidewalks, and some when the tourists had gone back. But I think that it was very welcoming. Also, the young man who built the addition on this house, who is an old family person here, a Schultes, said he was very grateful for the people who came here because that did provide them with work, altering houses. If they bought houses, they would remodel them or even build new ones, and he was very grateful for that. So I think maybe in the early days when the people came for the Birdcliff colony, there might have been more feeling from the local farmers and so on. I did read something about they just didn't like the artists leaving their paint rags in the fields for their animals or something to get a hold of. But I can't speak to that there was any negative feeling about people coming here. Growing up in town made a whole lot of difference because I've talked to people who lived outside, and their perspective is very different. I found that on the Commode Committee and on the Comprehensive Plan Committee. You know, there was the very different. But being here, it was a part of life. You know, so I was glad for that. When I went from Woodstock to Kingston High School, that was a real eye-opener to me because Woodstock, my class had about 8 people in it, and the whole school maybe had 30 or 40. So when I went to Kingston, I met people from all different cultures and backgrounds. I just loved it. It was wonderful. So that when I carried that on, my first job was on an Indian reservation. And then I traveled to Europe for special services. So when I came back to Woodstock, I was really anxious to help out. I couldn't all those years, making a living and so on, working. So I was very grateful to be, serve on committees, and I met people that, of course, I didn't know, because so many people had come to live in Woodstock since I was a youngster. And there were people who were lawyers and artists and people who were home caregivers, and it just added to I guess you could say kind of like a catalog of appreciation and ideas for others and what they had to offer, and also how they perceived the town in growing and moving forward. The openness that we have now with people coming, and I think it's been good for everybody to have an influx of people from different walks of life, different backgrounds. I think that there's still a lot of that. I think that maybe we're more categorized in because we have different, I don't know whether it's different organizations or maybe a different thrust for our particular idea what the town should be. But I think there's a lot of openness. I think there's still an attitude maybe of, well, things aren't like they were when we were growing up, and it's true, and my brother says that, but no place is going to be the same as it was when you were growing up, and I think what's happened here has maybe been like labor pains, but it's been really good. You know, it's good, and the results are good. So, yeah, I think the openness is still here.